Thank you for joining us today, and I'll pass it over to Sarah for questions.
Thank you, Howard. Before we move on to the question section, I just wanted to mention that the white papers that Howard mentioned on the call or during his presentation are available on the technical resources section of our website. And if you want more information on that, you can just email me and I can give you specifics. Okay, just as a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, just send it through the question box in your webinar controls to the right. So we will move on to our first question. Okay, how can I fiscally justify this to my supervisors? Howard,
That's a very good question. You know, we actually talk with our clients about this fairly often, and if you take a look at the cost of your calibration compared to your overall cost of the business, and the impact that can have to the cost on quality, to scrap, reworked, or recalled product, or simply by evaluating what it costs you to do a nonconformance review. That's probably the easiest number to get to because it's a little bit more difficult to determine whether you had scrap or rework based on out-of-tolerance conditions, although you can do that. So the first and the low-hanging fruit I would go after is the impact of your out-of-tolerance evaluations. How many of you had, and what does it cost you per event? What is the time consumed for each of the individuals involved? And what we've discovered from our pharmaceutical and medical device customers is that this is anywhere from $5,000 per event up to $25,000 per event, depending on the product line. That can be very expensive. So first thing would be to get that understood so that you know how much that cost you, and then multiply it out times the number of nonconformance reviews that you've done. That should help you to justify investment in a better calibration program if that's the cause, so that you can reduce those costs.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, do you offer 17025 calibrations without uncertainty?
We currently do. That's been a point of debate. ILAC has put out a notification that uncertainties are to be provided with all accredited calibrations, and that's not yet been enforced. It's dependent on the accrediting body at this point. Right now we're accredited in all labs by NAVLAP, and NAVLAP has not enforced this fully yet. It may be coming, but we're waiting on a decision. And I think the question goes back to the wording around this subject. And it comes down to a simple and or in one of the statements that says you can interpret it one way to say you must provide uncertainties with every reading versus as long as you're giving the tolerances to the client, then you don't have to report the uncertainty. So that's the debate. And so we're waiting for a result of that. In the meantime, all of our calibrations are accredited regardless of service level. The service levels that we offer are CERT with data and uncertainties, CERT with data only and not the uncertainties, and then certificate only if you don't want the data. Although I do not recommend that level of service because you're not getting the information you need to make decisions about whether your tolerances were correct, out-of-tolerance information that you need to evaluate out-of-tolerance indications and nonconformance reviews. But those are the service levels that we currently offer, and that may change in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. We have had a few people ask if they can get copies of the presentation. We will have the recording up online, and I can also make the slides actually available as well. So just in case anybody else is wondering, we'll send those to you in follow-up emails after, probably next week. Next question is, how can I implement an equipment risk evaluation within our measurement program?
Equipment risk evaluation. Part of that would be to take a look through CalTrack Online. We offer for the calibrations we provide or for the calibrations that our clients have us send out to vendors for for the measurements we can't make, that information is all on Caltrack Online. And if you take a look at your instrument inventory and the results of the calibrations over a period of time, you can take a look at how reliable those instruments have been as a basis for changing your cal intervals or changing out equipment altogether. That's one way to go about it. Another thing would be when you see a high out-of-tolerance situation for a specific model or a specific instrument, take a look at how it's being used in your process. See if there's anything in your process that's influencing that to become out of tolerance. That's a possibility as well. We've seen that on occasion with clients. And you can reduce that liability of out of tolerance situations by perhaps implementing a change to the process where it's being used.
Okay. Next question is, do you see one type of error over other types of errors?
You know, the thing of those 10 categories, I assume that's what we're talking about here. It's surprising to me how often an instrument is not selected correctly for suitability for the intended purpose. One of the things that I always ask a client when they're talking about an instrument is, what are you trying to do with the instrument? Where are you using it? What are the production tolerances or the testing tolerances that it's being used against? Start with that. Understand where it's being used to make sure the suitability is correct and make sure that that instrument is capable of producing valid results for that type of measurement and for those tolerances. So that's one area that I'm a little surprised that I see problems with. And then another area is the calibration process itself. You know, without throwing any of our competitors under the bus, we see partial calibrations being done that are not identified as being partial calibrations. And traceability is lost for those clients, and that seriously impacts their quality, and they may not even realize it. I think they're getting a good calibration, and maybe they're not. So that's a big problem that needs to be monitored, or the watchdog has to be the client. It is the responsibility of the calibration lab to perform the calibration correctly. And unfortunately, there's not enough personnel or resources in these accrediting bodies for accredited labs to be the watchdog for that. They rely on the customers and or other labs to report situations that are not correct. Those are the two biggest areas.
Okay, great. Another question is, how can Transcat, I think it's judge in-out tolerances without uncertainty?
All of our accreditations are, all of our calibrations are accredited. We have uncertainties for every one of those readings, whether we report them or not. And we actually have a new tool that we've developed and have put into place that our technicians can see when they're performing the calibration. That is called the Probability of Compliance to Specification, or PCS tool. That allows them to understand where they are relative to the tolerance limits and our uncertainties. So that information is being used and is available at all times, whether the client receives that information or not.
Okay. Next one is on certification. What does certification tell us aside from functionality?
I assume certification meaning the calibration process. The calibration provides the traceability to SI units up through the traceability chain. Maybe reword the question if I missed the point there.
Okay. While we're waiting for that, when do we decide to adjust the equipment when it is near limit of tolerance?
That's a very good question. We're in transition at this moment because that PCS tool that I mentioned is something relatively new that we've developed. And right now, our standard practice is to adjust at 75% of the limit. Typically, if you're at a 4-to-1 test uncertainty ratio, or TUR, 75% would be the adjustment limit so that you're not into the guard band region. If you're not familiar with these terms, I recommend that you read our K equals 3.9 white paper on our website. So the PCS function that we have, or feature that we have in CalTrack for our technicians, is there to allow them, when they have the uncertainties, to see where they are into that guard band region. If they're into the guard band region at all, regardless of the TUR, that's when they'll make the adjustment. We do not optimize unless the customer asks us to optimize, meaning adjusting every time the instrument comes in, regardless of where it is. Again, that's a specific request. We don't want to do that because if customers are trending their data, that would interrupt the trend. So if they have it in a control chart or something like that. So again, that's a client request to optimize. Otherwise, we adjust currently at 75% unless we're reporting uncertainties, and then we adjust when it's in the guard band. And that will likely be changing to adjustment in the guard band at any time. We're in the process of putting that into place.
Okay, excellent questions.
Very good questions.
Yeah. Which is more accurate for pressure, analog or digital?
Well, it depends on the resolution. Obviously, with analog gauges of any type, you are interpreting. It's more open to subjective error. With digital gauges, you're going to be dependent on the resolution of the instrument as well as the toggle point for the next smallest digit to increment or decrement. So obviously digital gives you an advantage in that regard.
Okay. What would be a good way to determine an appropriate calibration tolerance for a given test point?
Calibration tolerances should always be compared, regardless of how they're determined, should always be compared against the test that the instrument is being used in. Those tolerances for that process are really what should drive that. So you want to have a good ratio there. It's no different than when a Cal Lab performs a calibration on your instrument to the tolerances, and their uncertainty has to be a relatively small relative to those tolerances. Same thing with using the instrument in your process. That accuracy or tolerance of your instrument needs to be relatively small compared to the tolerances you're trying to measure in your process. Pretty well standard for the industry is a 4-to-1 ratio. Then you get into whether you call that a test accuracy ratio or a test uncertainty ratio or a process accuracy ratio in this case versus a process uncertainty ratio, because there are other components besides the accuracy of the instrument that can influence where you are in that tolerance window for the process. So you really need to look at your uncertainties in that process, and I know most industries don't go there yet, but they really need to, and certainly those same concepts that we apply in the calibration lab can be applied in process measurements as well.